College Algebra, Section 11.4, page 803, problem number 60 as an example. We're supposed to take this general quadratic in x and y and find the center, the transverse axis, the vertices, the foci, the asymptotes, and graph it. Well, we need to work this a little bit so that we can graph it, and then we'll be able to find these others a little easier. I want to get all the x's together, so it's x squared plus 8x, and then minus 3y squared minus 6y, get the y's together, and put that 4, the constant, on the other side. What we're going to have to do here is complete the square. So, we take x squared plus 8x plus something. Now I'm going to factor out a negative 3 because I don't really want a negative inside. This becomes y squared plus, when you factor out a 3, this would be 2y plus something. And that equals a negative 4 plus a couple of things. So what are those things that we have to add? Well, remember how to complete the square. You take half the coefficient of the middle term, the linear term, that's 4, and you square it. And what do you add to the other side because of that? Well, 4 squared are 16. Now this next part, a little tricky, be careful. You take half the coefficient of the linear term, so that's 1 squared. But you don't add 1 squared here because this is multiplied by 3 also. So we add 3. But then that's a negative 3, so be careful there too. So now we get, because we were completing the square, x, the square root of that, plus the sine of the middle term, 4, the square root of the second, squared, minus 3 times y square root, sine plus, and the 1 quantity squared. And that equals, let's see, we've got 16 minus 7, so that's just 9. Okay. Now, because we want to get this into a hyperbola, we need to divide everybody by 9 because we need a 1 over here. So this is now x plus 4 quantity squared over 3 squared minus. Now this 3 is going to go into that 3 times. And this is then y plus 1 quantity squared. Take the square root of that and square it so you don't make the silly mistakes. And that equals 1. So what is a? Stuff underneath the x, 3, not the square. What is b? Stuff underneath the y, square root of 3. That's why we want to write that as a square. Do we need c? Yeah, because we need the foci. And we need the graph. So, okay. So we're going to graph this at negative 4 and a negative 1. X and y. So negative 4, negative 1. That's the center. The transverse axis goes right along that center. Oh, I'm sorry. We know it opens right and left because the x is first. So we know that the transverse axis is here through the center. So that's y equals a negative 1. The vertices, we got to find that spot here. Let's see, we measure right and left with a. So 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. And that's where the vertices are because it opens right and left. Measure up and down with the square root of 3, which is like 1.7, plus a little. So up almost 2, and down almost 2. We put in our dashed lines for the rectangle. See, 1 and, yeah, here it is. We put in the dashed lines for the asymptotes. And now we know, because it opens right and left, start on this rectangle and approach the asymptotes. On this rectangle, approach the asymptotes. Our foci are inside here. So let's see if we can answer anything else here in just a second. The vertices. Oh, that's this stuff right here. So this is -1, -1. And this one is -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, -7, -1. The foci, we got to find out what C is. Okay. So because this is a right triangle, this is A, which is 3. This is B, which is the square root of 3. And C is that hypotenuse. So A squared, 3 squared, plus B squared, square root of 3 squared equals C squared. 9 plus 3 is C squared. 12 is C squared. So the square root of 12, which is the same as 2 times the square root of 3, is C. And then we can find our foci by taking the x value. So we need to go to this, that square root of 12 is what we add to the center to get to that focus. So we take this -4 and add the square root of 12 for the x, and the y is a -1. We also need this -4 plus the square root of 12 and a -1. The asymptotes. Remember, we can do this by picking any point on these lines. I'm going to pick the middle, the -4, -1. So I can write this as y minus a -4, which is +4, and I got the slope, hold on to that, x minus a -1, so it's +1. How do I find the slope? The rise over the run, square root of 3 over 3. That's the equation of the asymptotes if you do a plus this slope and a minus this slope. And the graph is already done. So, problem 60. A lot to that one, but if you can do that, you can answer any question you need for hyperbola.